Joining me, I have to say, is somebody who is making a difference in this area. It's Jane Searle from Child Matters. And I've asked her onto the show particularly in response to the issue we were dealing with yesterday, which was that two more children, little 5-year-old boys, Malachi and Pharaoh James, were killed by their whānau and caregivers. And a very, very good investigative piece by a journalist at Stuff. I don't often praise Stuff because it's a quite politically correct organ, but I have to say this was spot on. Pointed out that there is a gap in our legislation that allows child abuse to essentially be ignored in early childcare centres and in educational centres in New Zealand. No one was prepared to speak to the journalist about this except Jane. And Jane joins us this morning. Jane, first of all, tell me a little bit about Child Matters, please, because you've been going for 30 years.
Morning, Michael. Yes, we've been going for almost 30 years. So we're a charity. We train nationwide how to identify the signs of abuse and then how to deal with that appropriately, which includes reporting. So we work with community organisations, we work with schools, we work with government agencies, and we also write policies and procedures. And the reason we do it is that it's not mandated, so we've been advocating for this for almost 30 years.
You are not funded by the government yet. I understand you train government agencies and individuals who work in them to recognise and report on child abuse. Is that right?
We do. So we do have, at times we are contracted by government to work with some of the government agencies, and we have done that over the time with corrections and Oranga Tamariki and others. But most of what we do, we're a charity, so we raise our own funds is what we do, particularly, and when we train in community organisations, we heavily subsidise all of that ourselves. Now,
the bit that came out of that article, and you would be aware of it too because you were interviewed for it, was that nobody wanted to talk about the flaw or the gap in New Zealand's law that essentially says that if I'm a teacher or an early childhood worker, I don't have to report the fact that one of my charges is being abused by an adult. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's something that has just astounded me for years working in this area because we are lagging behind the rest of the world. If you look at Canada or Ireland or England, the US, particularly California, Australia, they all have mandatory reporting and mandatory training because if you want people to report abuse, you have to train them what they're looking for. So that has to go hand in hand. Why we haven't done it in this country astounds me because there is no reason for us not to, and it's an easy step that can help in our fight against child abuse.
I get a feeling that the teacher unions are opposed. Have you struck that yourself?
No, I haven't struck that, but I know that it is an issue that can be contentious, and I know that other countries have been through that. So Ireland brought this legislation in fairly recently. It came into effect in 2017, the Children's First Act, and that brought mandatory reporting. And I know that discussion went on from the 90s in Ireland, and it's been very successfully implemented there. So the concern often is, well, then you would break the relationship with a family if you report, for example, to Oranga Tamariki or the police, and if the appropriate action isn't taken. Well, my argument to counter that is that we don't just not report because the systems isn't coping, we fix the system as well.
Yeah, I would have thought that, so that makes surely teachers, and I'm thinking of Malachi and the other little boy as well, Pharaoh James? Yeah,
that's right.
I'm thinking that in that case the abuse was clear. It was clear to the people who were working with these wee kiddies. They saw it, they commented upon it, but they did nothing. Doesn't that almost make them complicit in the death of these children as well?
Well, I think that it's the system that we've got. So as you saw in that article that was written by Stuff, there was very little comment from the Ministry of Education. So while they have guidelines and that they point, if you click in there, it leads them through to pages on how to report on Oranga Tamariki, they're not receiving this training. So any schools that we train come to us because their board of trustees or their principal decides they need it. But there are many, many schools who don't have it and tell us they don't need this training or they don't prioritise it. And the problem with that is then they're not always knowing what they're seeing and they don't know the seriousness. The golden rule of dealing with child abuse is you never deal with it in isolation. If you see something, then you seek advice and you take action of some sort. So in Ireland, they recognise this. So their reporting is that you can report knowledge, belief, or suspicion. And that the legislation clearly states it's just your suspicion that you need to report. So people need to understand that when you report, it doesn't mean that a set thing is going to happen. It means an investigation should then kick off, and then that should be looked at. People think you need to be sure to report. We have lots of teachers come to us who want this training and find this a very, very stressful part of their job. But until we mandate it, the schools are not going to do it routinely. And until we give them the training they need. Other countries have done it. There is no reason that New Zealand can't do this immediately.
No, I listen. I just think it's a scandal. It's as simple as that. And so I'm looking for the reasons why. And you're absolutely right. The reason that it is advanced, that we don't want to upset our relationship with the whānau who's abusing the child. So what are you going to do instead? And there doesn't seem to be an instead either, does there?
No, there isn't. And the thing we've got to remember with child abuse in this country, I mean, in January of this year, in the first 3 weeks of January, we lost one child every week. As you said before, that is scandalous. That in a country the size of our population, that we this year already have averaged a child one every 6 weeks in this country. And these deaths are completely avoidable. And so we need to prioritise this and do some of the things. So there's other systems things like fixing oranga tamariki, and we've had lots and lots of reviews on that. And there is some work, but there's lots of things we need to do, but some of them are quite easy, such as passing legislation for mandatory reporting. And it is just completely illogical to me why that has never been addressed.
Is there a cultural aspect to this as well? Is that the elephant in the room here? That because there are a disproportionate number of children who, shall we say, identify with one ethnicity, we want to be sensitive about that, so we don't want to upset people. Is that something you've struck?
No, I don't think so. I think that there is so much in the system that needs to be fixed that hasn't been prioritised, and that there's so much that is just sat in reports and reviews that has never been implemented. So I know frontline social workers who've worked frontline for 15 years that will tell you nothing on the frontline has changed in 15 years, but a change of name and change of languaging and a change of talk around politicians. But actually, all that's happened is things have got worse. So I think it's systematic of something bigger. I also think the statistics don't lie on how the systems are failing Māori. There is no doubt about that. And I think that what we need is some courageous leadership who's actually going to implement some of this change. We've had enough reviews, we've had enough national strategies talked about. Yeah. We actually need some regional solutions.
No, I mean, it's amazing. We keep on talking about it. There have been so many reports on child abuse in this country. I detect, at least from the media as well, a fatigue. Like, for example, we used to put children who died on the front page of the newspaper, and rightly so, because it was shocking. Now it's almost like they're an accident victim.
I think that's right, and I think there's another thing that happens is that certain cases get a lot of media attention for whatever reason. There are lots and lots of children that have died in this country that we don't know their names. So there's always Maria Glassy and the Mokos, but we lose it on average as a child every 5 to 6 weeks in this country, and that often shocks people when I give them that statistic. And then that's just the children that we tragically lost their lives. Then there's the thousands that are being abused every day, and they're the ones that don't have the voice. They're the ones that are unspoken of. So there's statistics. We have huge statistics, as you rightly said at the beginning of this, and yet actually it doesn't seem to get that political focus.
Does it need a private members bill? Have you found an MP who might actually do the decent thing and introduce legislation into Parliament?
No, we haven't found an MP, and I think that is what it needs. What we are getting now is we're getting, like the piece that you talked about in Stuff, we've had a huge reaction from that because people are contacting us saying, we never knew that this wasn't mandatory, that doesn't even make sense. People also expect, for example, that all social workers get trained in child abuse, and they don't in this country. They expect their teachers have had some sort of formal training, and they haven't had it, same with doctors and nurses. So I think that the public think more is happening than is, and they don't realise that how loose the systems are and how we need to implement these changes really quickly, because as you said, we have some of the worst statistics in the world alongside the other statistics of our teen suicide rates, where we lead the world, unfortunately, as well. There's also other statistics, because these things don't sit in isolation.
No, they do
not. They're connected to all sorts of other social issues as well.
I guess from a personal point of view, I've seen the background for where these children came from. In many cases, there are that they don't get killed out of a clear blue sky. In essence, there are clear indications that consequence is going to happen, and yet nobody intervenes along the way, whether it's the judicial system, social workers, schools, early childcare centres, wider whānau and family. Should it be compulsory that whānau and family intervene as well? That we make people responsible for, if they see something evil, reporting evil?
Look, I think we need to tighten up on that. There is some provision under the Crimes Act, on Section 195A of the Crimes Act, if someone is living with a child and there's other stipulations, or if they're in residential care, who is responsible for intervening. But that talks about taking reasonable measures to intervene. That doesn't even talk about mandatory reporting. Yeah. So there is some provision, but it's very high level. We do need to extend that. I mean, I'm an ex-police detective, well, I was a child abuse detective. Those inquiries are very, very difficult. And they can be very difficult when you're dealing with distressed family and whānau members as well. But the police need every arsenal they can, and they need the good legislation to be able to help them to do their jobs on this.
Mind you.
I think we need a really open debate about it.
No, listen, I agree, and it's something that we don't have the debate about. I'm just stunned by that. But then I'm stunned by the reaction to when the chance is there for a debate. You had everybody from the Ministry of Education to the NZEI to PPTA not wanting to know. Refusing to contribute to it.
That's right. And this isn't a new issue. I mean, our organisation, other organisations have been advocating for mandatory reporting for years. So this isn't new. And it's just because of this particular case, it has come up. But the sadness around that is that it took a case like this to actually bring the attention to it, when we always knew it was there.
The work you do, I think you do fantastic stuff. You're doing God's work. Good on you. Thank you.